I always knew that my neighbor Karen was a cheapskate, but I never imagined that she would be so brazen as to steal my fruit every night. My apple and peach crops started to mysteriously disappear, and when I checked the cameras, there she was, filling bags as if my farm was a free supermarket. Every morning, it was the same scene. I'd go out to check on my fruit trees and notice the damage: broken branches, crumpled leaves, and, worst of all, missing fruit. At first, I thought it was raccoons, maybe some clever deer. But no, it wasn't nature taking advantage of my hard work. It was something far worse. The problem started small: 1 or 2 peaches disappearing, a few apples less, nothing that made me lose any sleep. But as the weeks went by, it escalated. My fruit trees, which used to be full, started to look like Christmas trees after December 26th, devastated, as if a swarm of well-organized locusts had come through. That's when I started to notice certain strange patterns. For example, only the ripe fruit was gone. Any bug would have picked it all up, made a mess, dropped some on the ground. But here, number it was as if an expert was picking, sorting, and taking away only what was at the right point. It all came to a head when I found footprints. And they weren't animal tracks. They were shoe prints, sunk into the wet earth after the rain. Small enough to belong to someone small, but still an adult. The neighbor was the main suspect, of course. That woman didn't know the meaning of the word limit. Ever since she became president of the HOA, the damn neighborhood association that thinks it has the power of a parallel government, she acted as if the neighborhood were her personal fiefdom. And now, apparently, my farm was part of the package. I started paying more attention to the timetable. The fruit was always gone in the morning. In other words, the attack was happening at night. I did what any sensible person would do. I installed cameras, some visible to try to scare the thief, and others well hidden to catch the smart guy. The first night, the mystery was over. There she was, in her dull beige blouse and yoga pants that had never seen a stretching class in her life, a bag in her hand, another already full of peaches slung over her shoulder, and the way she walked, without haste, without fear, as if she were in her own pantry, choosing what she was going to make for breakfast. The audacity caught me off guard. This was no ordinary robbery. This was an expedition. This woman wasn't grabbing some fruit on impulse. She had a strategy, a plan of attack, a frightening efficiency. I watched the footage again in disbelief. She picked the fruit with irritating delicacy, assessing each one before putting it in the bag. Even the branches were carefully removed, so as not to leave obvious traces. A real professional crime. I took a deep breath. Okay, I knew who it was. Now I knew who it was. But what should I do? Call the police? It could be an exaggeration. I mean, technically it was just fruit theft. But on the other hand, how many months was I going to let this woman treat my property like a free branch of the supermarket? So I decided I was going to do it my way. But not just any way. If she wanted to steal fruit, I was going to make sure her next harvest was a memorable one. If there's one thing that gets me down, it's slackers. I'm not talking about someone grabbing an apple on impulse as they pass my farm. I'm talking about someone treating my orchard like a market shelf, picking calmly, organizing the bags, and coming back night after night as if they had a premium subscription plan. The first idea was quite simple: reinforce the padlocks and install an electric fence. But then I stopped and thought, this was exactly what she wanted. The kind of people who think they're above the rules love it when you wear yourself out, trying to protect yourself. Nothing would be more satisfying for this woman than to see me wasting money and time, while she would undoubtedly find another way in. So, no fence, no warning, no prevention. I was going to play her game. I started by leaving false clues. I picked up some apples and scattered them on the ground as if they had fallen naturally. I also left some fruit in easy-to-reach spots to guide her exactly where I wanted her to go. That's because, in my plan, it wasn't enough to catch her in the act. I needed to humiliate her in the process. Over the next few nights, I observed the pattern. She always arrived between midnight and 1 a.m., as if following a schedule. This woman's efficiency was annoying. She came alone, probably so as not to share the profits of the robbery, and avoided any direct lighting. Even her clothes were planned. No flashy colors, just neutral tones to blend in with the darkness. Then came the most absurd detail. Reviewing the recordings, I realized that, after the robbery, she returned home and, the next day, sold some fruit at the neighborhood community market. Yes, you read that right. She was profiting from my work. If I were a little more naive, I'd admire her audacity. But I'm not naive. She wasn't just a slacker. She was a criminal with a touch of savage capitalism. So I came to the final part of the plan, the trap. First, I went to the police station and talked to a policeman friend, explaining the situation. It's not every day that someone wants to set up an operation to arrest a peach thief, so he laughed it off. But when I showed him the recordings and explained that she was reselling the products, things changed. Simple theft, petty crime, theft with intent to profit. That was another level. We set up the strategy. The following evening, while I pretended to follow my normal routine, 5 plainclothes policemen positioned themselves around the property. 3 hid among the trees, and 2 stood near the main entrance, ready to block any attempt to escape. What about me? Well, I made sure I had everything ready to make her night special. I left some boxes of fruit organized, as if they had just been picked and were waiting to be taken inside. I scattered a few bags near the fence, just so she'd think I was really making her job easier. When the clock struck midnight, there she was, punctual as a Swiss train. She walked in with the confidence of someone who has done this dozens of times. Bag folded in her pocket, light steps, watchful eye. She passed the first row of trees, picked up 2 apples and a plum, as if she were tasting them, before moving on to the main course. It didn't even feel like she was committing a crime. It felt like she was in her own personal horticultural paradise. But her paradise was about to turn into hell. As soon as she reached the checkout area, she bent down to pick up a peach, and bam! The spotlights came on. The police came out of nowhere. This woman's screech could easily have been mistaken for the hooting of a stricken owl. She tried to run, but as a good HOA president, she must never have run a meter in her life. Within 2 seconds, the police officers were at her side. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and trespassing," one of the officers announced, while she was still trying to process what was happening. She opened her eyes wide, as red as a freshly picked strawberry. But that's a mistake. I was just picking some fruit for personal consumption." "Of course," I replied, stepping out of the shade of the trees with a smile of pure sarcasm. "That's why you always take bags full and sell them at the market the next day, isn't it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no answer. The scene was glorious. The police handcuffed her hands and began to lead her to the car. She, of course, tried to reverse the situation, first begging, then threatening. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Oh, I knew all too well. And now the whole neighborhood would know too. If there's one thing these types of people hate more than being caught, it's being caught in front of witnesses. And, my friend, there were plenty of witnesses that night. The police operation, with its spotlights worthy of a rock concert, didn't go unnoticed. A few windows lit up, neighbors opened their doors, and, before I could blink, there was a small crowd forming on the sidewalk. A few people, still in their pajamas, were whispering as they pointed at the scene. And there she was, the big star of the evening, being put in the car like a real criminal. "This is absurd!" she screamed, struggling as if she could escape a trained policeman on the basis of indignation alone. "You can't do this to me! I'm a respected person in this neighborhood." The policeman holding her didn't even blink. "You have the right to remain silent." She obviously didn't use that right. "This is harassment. I will sue all of you. Release me immediately." The irony? She always loved calling the police on others. A dog barking after 10 at night? Police? Someone painted the fence a color she didn't approve of? Police? A child left a bicycle on the sidewalk for 5 minutes? Police. Now, finally, she was on the other side of the coin. I just stood there with my arms crossed, soaking up every second of the public humiliation. But the best was yet to come. The next morning, I barely had to leave the house to know that the scandal was already going viral in the neighborhood. My phone was buzzing with messages from acquaintances and neighbors. Some asked if it was true. Others wanted to know if I had videos. Obviously I did. And some, more discreet, just said, I knew there was something wrong with that woman. The best was when I passed the neighborhood bakery and saw a group of old ladies whispering excitedly in the coffee line. They didn't even try to hide it when they saw me. One of them, Mrs. Jenkins, who had always been one of the biggest victims of the HOA's oppressive rules, even gave me a complicit look. So, you're the one who finally caught the HOA queen red-handed? I smiled. Let's just say she wasn't expecting such a well-guarded orchard. She let out a chuckle, while another lady whispered, and they say she sold the fruit. Do you believe that? Oh yes, I did. And I knew something even juicier. Because while Karen spent the night at the police station trying to convince the officers that it was all just a big misunderstanding, I was busy releasing the icing on the cake, the recordings. Nothing speaks louder than a video. I didn't need to post anything online. Just share it with a few strategic people, and the file spread faster than reality show gossip. Even the neighborhood school janitor knew the story before noon. The most amusing thing? The reactions. First came the collective indignation. After all, that woman had spent years patrolling the neighborhood, issuing ridiculous fines and lecturing on respecting the rules. Now, the very defender of order had been caught up in the biggest crime of the year. Then came the revolt. Many realized that it wasn't just about stealing fruit. It was a question of principle. She was stealing, reselling, and, at the same time, trying to force everyone to follow her rules. And suddenly, everyone began to wonder, what else was she hiding? And then, my friend, her house became a pilgrimage point. If there's one thing a gossipy neighbor loves more than a scandal, it's feeling part of it. And so the real community investigation began. Some residents began to take a closer look at what was going on in her house. One of them noticed a strange flow of late-night deliveries. Another recalled that she received huge boxes in the mail, and that, curiously, no one ever saw anything new at her house. A guy down the street, who worked at the bank, commented that he'd heard rumors about suspicious transactions linked to the HOA. And that's how, little by little, the puzzle began to form. I had no intention of turning this into a crusade, but it seemed that my plan to catch her red-handed had opened a veritable Pandora's box. Because, when we least expected it, we discovered that the theft of my fruit was the least of her problems. After Karen was caught stealing my fruit, the neighborhood became a veritable anthill of gossip. But, as we soon discovered, the peach thief was just the tip of the iceberg. When people started digging deeper, the secrets started pouring out. It was as if everyone suddenly had an unresolved affair with her. And honestly, it makes sense. When you spend years meddling in other people's lives, fining neighbors for grass too high, and calling the police because a car was parked 2 minutes too long, eventually people build up a certain resentment. And now, with her reputation plummeting faster than a cat slipping off a wet roof, the neighbors finally had the courage to speak up. The first blow came from the HOA's accountant. She, who had never dared to challenge Karen before, finally opened her mouth to say that there were discrepancies in the association's accounts. In other words, money was disappearing. It didn't take long for some more attentive neighbors to start pulling the records. What they found was worthy of a crime documentary. Fees charged twice, amounts withdrawn without explanation, funds earmarked for maintenance, which, curiously, never seemed to result in any visible improvement in the neighborhood. And the best part? There were suspicious payments made to an account in the name of a fictitious company. In other words, Karen wasn't just stealing fruit. She was stealing money from everyone. But wait, it gets worse. While the accountant was organizing the documents to hand over to the authorities, another neighbor, an ex-cop who lived on the main street, decided he wanted a piece of the action. He ran a background check on our lovely fruit thief, and that's how we discovered that Karen already had a history of financial problems. A lawsuit here, a debt there, and a failed attempt to become a successful entrepreneur, which, as it turns out, ended up with her owing money to half the world. Now it suddenly made sense. She wasn't taking my fruit because she loved nature. She was taking them because she was desperate to make money. And if there's one thing the HOA has, it's money. The puzzle fell into place. She was charging her neighbors extra fees under ridiculous pretexts. She diverted some of the money to personal accounts. She did little side businesses, like selling stolen fruit, to make a quick buck. And all this, of course, with the confidence that she would never get caught, until she was. The scandal reached the police before Karen even left the station. The day after her arrest, investigators started looking at the HOA's accounts. What they found was enough to turn a case of fruit theft into a real case of financial fraud. At the end of the week, the bombshell came. Karen was indicted for embezzlement, misappropriation, and financial fraud. Yes, my friends, the woman who wanted to teach me a lesson about sharing with the community was stealing from her own community all along. And, as it turns out, in the middle of the investigation, they discovered that she was still trying to evade taxes by declaring a lower income than she actually had. Another crime for the collection. The neighborhood was celebrating. The same people she had infuriated for years now watched with satisfaction as they saw her escorted by the police. This time, with a real arrest warrant. Of course, she tried everything. She played the victim, cried, blamed the system, claimed it was all a conspiracy against her. But when a whole dossier appeared with evidence, bank records and testimonies from neighbors who saw her stealing fruit and money, there was no way out. In court, they tried to give her a deal to return the money and get a lighter sentence. But, stubborn to the last second, she refused. She said she would fight to the end. And well, the end came quickly. When the sentence finally came down, the neighborhood organized a celebratory barbecue. No joke. The organizer's speech was perfect. Today, we celebrate freedom. The freedom not to receive fines for stupid things. The freedom to walk down the street without being watched by binoculars from our beloved former HOA president. Today, we are a free neighborhood. The Residents Association collapsed because no one wanted to pay fees anymore without knowing where they were going. In the end, the residents decided to overhaul everything and put in place a more transparent system. Oh, and about me? Well, my orchard is more prosperous than ever. I've even sold some fruit at the neighborhood market for a fair price, without having to steal it first. And Karen? Well, according to rumors, she's planning to write a book about how she was wronged by an ungrateful neighborhood. Honestly, I'd buy it, just for laughs. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more.